class. I hope that school's treating you well and that some sunshine's coming out for you as it is for me right now. I wanted to discuss basically the major assignment for week 4 here is your introduction. So I'm going to discuss that briefly, and then I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the nature of classic literature and how it can be quite depressing, and that has hopefully nothing to do with me, your instructor, being a depressing person or you being depressing people, but we'll talk about why that is in a little bit. But basically, let's start with the introduction. The introduction is an introduction for essay number 1. So in order to prepare to write this introduction effectively, you're going to need to read the module on introductions and read the module on essay number 1 that gives the instructions. The basics of essay number 1 are, and you should read it more carefully than what I'm going to explain, but the basics are, you're going to pick a story, any story on the syllabus, one that you've read already, and you're going to prove whether the main character learned the lesson in the story. So just briefly, that means, and this is detailed in the instructions, body paragraph number 1, you're using textual evidence to prove the character's initial state in the story, the beginning state. Body paragraph number 2, you're using textual evidence to prove the possible turning point when he or she could have learned his or her lesson. And then the final paragraph should be proving if he or she learned the lesson or not. Sometimes people can kind of break this, breaks down into this retelling of the story using text thrown in. That's not what you want to do. Remember, each body paragraph is going to be trying to prove a specific point that all ties into this greater whole of did your character learn a lesson or not. So that being said, any introduction, and I think it helps to have 4 main elements. And I break this down into a few more in the modules, but I'm going to kind of lump some of them together here. But basically, it's always good to have a hook. A hook draws your reader in, and it can be an overused device, but I do think it's helpful to have a question, a bold statement, a quotation that draws your reader in, gets them thinking about the topic that you're going to explore. Think of it as this, that you don't have a teacher that has to read your paper to grade it, that you have somebody that you want to read their paper, and how do you get them thinking and pulled in and want to keep reading rather than putting the paper down. So you always need some sort of hook. The second thing that you need in an effective introduction is you need context setting. Okay? It's basically setting context. It's background on the argument that you're going to prove. So you need to, for a literary analysis, good context includes the name of the author, make sure you spell it correctly, and the name of the story, which short stories are in quotation marks, remember that. So name of the author and name of the story, and then in a literary analysis, you want to have a sentence or 2 that explains what happened in the story. Not lots of sentences, just a sentence or 2. For instance, for The Swimmer, you could say that if I wanted to make a 1-sentence summary of what happened, I would say, Nettie swam from pool to pool only to find out when he got home that his house was deserted and his family had left him. Something that's simple, okay? Just very to the point of what happened in the story. So hook, and then context, which author, title, little bit of a summary. Okay, the next 2 are your thesis and a blueprint sentence. So your thesis is the point that you're trying to prove. In this case, what was the lesson, and did your character learn the lesson or not? And you don't frame it in a question, you frame it as an answer. A thesis is always an answer to a question. So in my mind, I would be thinking, did Nettie learn? What was the lesson Nettie was supposed to learn? Did he learn his lesson or not? So before I formulate that, I'm just brainstorming here. I would think, well, one potential lesson, you could come up with a different one, is that that living a life of denial does not work to your benefit. So maybe that's what I'm thinking. Through this journey, he should have faced reality. All these opportunities that he had to face reality when people were talking to him about what was going on in his life. So, so I think the lesson should be that he should have learned was to face that it's important to face reality in order to have a healthy life. So then I think, did he learn that lesson or not? Well, I'm thinking probably it didn't seem like he learned that lesson or not. I never saw a moment where he was like, aha, yes, all these things happened to me. It was a surprise to him when he came home. So those elements are going to go into my thesis statement. And then with a thesis statement, you want to have a blueprint sentence, some sort of blueprint sentence. Sometimes your thesis and blueprint sentences are actually one together. That's fine to do that. But your blueprint provides an argument, the overview of your argument, of what your body paragraphs are going to be about. So in this case, my body paragraphs are going to be about Nettie being carefree and not facing the reality of a mature adult from the beginning. And I think for me that'd be easy to prove some of his actions in the beginning. And then I want to explain that he had chances to learn his lesson, to face reality. And there were many of those when people talked to him about what was going on in his life, and he didn't seem to understand what they were talking about. And then the final one, did he learn his lesson? No. So in this case, I'm going to put my blueprint sentence together with my thesis sentence, and I'm going to say something like, despite the fact that Nettie had many occasions throughout his journey to learn to face reality, Nettie remained carefree and he remained in a state of not facing reality up to the very end of the story. Up to and including the very end of the story. So that's not the best thesis statement, and blueprint together. But basically, and I think I have a better one in the module, but I'm trying to go extemporaneously here on the video. But basically, you want to combine your point. You want to have a sentence that has your point of what you're trying to prove, if they learn the lesson or not, and then somehow that explains what the body paragraphs are going to be about. And sometimes it's helpful to combine those two. So again, I think what I just told you probably wasn't the most clear, but you can check. I think I do a better job in the modules of the example introduction that I wrote. I think is a little bit better. Okay, so definitely do your best with that. I think I ask you in the directions to just make bullet points after your introduction of what your body paragraphs, what you're going to try to improve in each one. If you could do that for me, that'd be great. If somehow you forget that, I'll just ask, is this what you intend to do? But if you lay it out for me, that's a lot better. Definitely ask me questions. I'll do a video for next week that's focusing a little bit more on the body paragraphs, which are just like your assertion paragraphs. Okay, so that being said, the other thing I want to talk about is the stories. The story selection, as you can see, a lot of the stories are quite depressing. This has little to do with your instructor, I would say. I'm a very cheerful, upbeat, happy, positive, glasses half full type of person. But one thing that you might find throughout the course of your life is classic literature. And classic, what I mean by classic is that literature that's typically studied, that's considered worthy of study in college or in school. Classic literature tends to be depressing. I guess that's the best way I can say it. I had this discussion with some people recently, and we were brainstorming stories that are considered classic literature that end positively. And there are some, but it is much less often. And, I sort of sometimes think of it like this, like when I read books, sometimes I read beach reading, where it's just entertaining. Like you turn the pages quickly and There's usually a happy ending or some sort of romance, and it's kind of mindless. Um, like I said, I like to call it beach reading. Who wants to really think very hard when they're sitting on the beach? But then there's another type of reading that's really for us to learn and grow as human beings. And I find this with movies too, that it's not that there can never be a happy ending, but sometimes maybe if the focus is always on the happy ending, mm, sometimes I think things can get lost in life, perhaps. I'm not sure. Um, you know, life, it doesn't always have the Prince Charming come rescue whoever, So anyway, that being said, what I would like you to do, if you want to get 10 points extra credit, send me a private message that maybe gives your perspective on why you think classic literature is oftentimes a little bit of a downer that might not always be positive. And actually, I think of even some stories that I think, like if you've read Harry Potter, for example, it might be silly to bring up, but I think that those are fabulous books, not just for kids, but, or if you've seen the movies. It's not all roses in that story. There's things that happen throughout the course of that saga that are hard, that Harry has to deal with and his friends have to deal with, and that anyway, so sometimes when I'm trying to think about the reason why classic literature is like that, it's helpful to think of when, stories that maybe a lot of people have read. But anyway, that being said, pop me a private message. Give me your perspective. Why do you think a lot of times stories that are worthy of study are oftentimes not all peaches and cream? So if you send me a private message for that, actually, I'll give you 15 points extra credit if you prop me a private message with your perspective. So please realize that if you find a story depressing, don't dismiss it as something that's not worthy of thought. Try and think about, what do you think the author is trying to tell us? Granted, a lot of authors have really, really tragic lives, diseases, marrying cousins at 13 and dying of drug use and alcohol, shooting themselves. There are a lot of authors that have some, think of great artists. There's a lot of great artists that really struggle with a lot of issues. But anyway, that kind of all ties in together. Maybe pop me a private message, 15 points extra credit. Enough of my rambling. I hope you have a great week. Hope the sunshine comes out, and we'll talk to you later. Bye.